Hi friends, it's cool out today, so I get to be my own brand of cool by dressing up in pseudo video gamish druidic garb, if you can call it that. Here's the thing though, you always see druids in their hoods. To get really connected with nature, those hoods, they have to come down, and I'll explain why in a moment. Connecting with nature, well, it can be a big how. How do we really do this? There's some great books that give us practical exercises. In the last video, I spoke about trying to follow things. So taking any one element, whether it's moss or a certain plant, and seeing if it can speak to us. And I hinted a little bit in that last video that getting receptive was important. But today I really want to emphasize that. And this is one of those things that, it could sound a little woo-woo. But here's the thing about taking that hood down. We have so many protective layers that we humans tend to wear when we go out into nature. And by protective layers, I don't just mean the clothing. I mean, probably more importantly, the mental, emotional layers that we wear. It's probably a truth of the world that we cannot observe any system without influencing it in some way. And it's surely a truth that we humans are not very capable of observing something without putting our baggage onto that situation. So a human world example would be a relationship with another person. If you're going to meet someone for the first time, and you have learned that they suffer from anxiety, or you've learned that they are an alcoholic, or you've learned that they are an extreme skier. Whatever you've learned, that is likely to color your perception of them when you go to meet them. So I go to meet somebody, but I have some ideas already preformed in my mind. And now when I meet that person, I meet them, but I meet them through the filter of my ideas. Now what if I could go to meet that person and just be as receptive as possible? Even though I've been given this preliminary information, to let that go from my mind as much as possible and to experience them as they emerge. Then I may have a different experience of who that person is. Now, when I do that in nature, that's when it can really become powerful. It's fine, like last time. In that last video, we spoke about having some knowledge of nature, some preconceptions, can help us to understand some of the interrelations of things. And that's one aspect of getting to know the natural world. In the same way that I probably shouldn't discount the person being an extreme skier. That might lead to some really interesting conversations. But if I go straight in and say, wow, I heard you're an extreme skier, that might be all I learn about them. And they might also be passionate about food or something else, and I might learn about that if I don't jump right into trying to pigeonhole or force things into the ideas that I already have laid out. So out here, I feel like we can come to this really powerful new level by taking down our hood. So what I mean by that, maybe you've seen my Naked Extreme Winter Survival Challenge, or some of the other survival challenges that I've done, or laying in the snow and talking with Rebecca about the Wim Hof method. So these are not to show how tough I am, or even really to show how tough humans can be. Instead, they are an attempt to show what we humans are capable of when we are receptive. So I can't have Rebecca bury me in the snow when I'm fighting it. I have to just accept the feelings and the sensations that are there. Then they no longer register as pain. Out here, if I have my proverbial hood up, if I come out with preconceptions and I decide that's the way that nature is, and this can be in a broad brush way, nature's uncomfortable, or nature welcomes me with open arms, or whatever the preconception is that I have. Or it can be detailed, looking at, again, this moss. All right, and now I know its Latin name and exactly what it likes in a habitat and exactly its role in the ecosystem. Those are fine. That's one filter. But I can also experience a person, a situation, this moss, unfiltered. Granted, perhaps we humans can't take off all of our filters, but we can release a lot of them. And that's what I'd really like to share today. And the trick to entering into a true receptivity with the world is the same trick that we have to face when we're trying to learn how to meditate. When someone is trying to help us to be able to fall asleep more effectively at night. We essentially want to have an action that we can perform. We want to know what we have to do in order to get the result. So these things like falling asleep or entering into a quietude, meditative state, these are inactions. They're not things that we do so much as things that happen to us when we allow a certain openness. And these are difficult to speak about in the English language because we don't have effective words or verbiage or even built-in concepts for these things. But if you imagine falling asleep, you probably know if you sit there and you say, I really want to fall asleep. I want to fall asleep. Come on. Come on. You can do it. Fall asleep. That's exactly the opposite of what's necessary for me to fall asleep. In fact, to fall asleep, if you're someone who has trouble falling asleep, to fall asleep, often I have to sort of let go of that whole desire to fall asleep. When meditating, there are concentrative meditations, and those we can explain how to do. But there are also meditations that ask us to have this deep receptivity. And with those, we have to let go. We have to release in order to get into that meditative state that we're seeking. So the trick is, how do we do something that is not something we can do? When I take the hood down, I let go of a resistance. When we take a cold shower We're not even going to time it. We just open ourselves up to the sensation. We're releasing. When we lay down in bed, we close our eyes and we just let go of expectation. That's that releasing. Understanding that we have a will, a desire. And when that desire is fixated on something, it very strongly wants to attach an action to make that into a goal. So the first thing we do if we want to not have this goal is we have to let go of expectation. When we come out and we want to become really powerful at blending in, communing with nature, the first thing we have to do is let go of that desire to be at druidic capacity with our nature communion. If I can release expectation, I've taken a huge step in the direction of opening myself. Now, it doesn't hurt to not dress like I'm dressed, to shed some clothes. So if you saw my naked overnight, not the winter one, but the one I did more recently, where I tried to kind of become an animal. That's what I'm talking about here. If we take off our shoes, remove some of our clothes, if we eat some of the wild edibles around us and let those flavors permeate our sense of taste and actually come into our being, all of these things can help us to release a little bit some of the usual walls that we have up around us. And then comes the trickiest part, which is opening our minds and becoming really receptive. Now, this part kind of defies explanation, and you've probably noticed already the irony of me saying that this isn't something we can do and then trying to explain to you how we can do it and giving you some concrete steps, at least semi-concrete, maybe still poured wet concrete, but at least pointing in the right direction. But at the same time, this is where things get really cool. To let our mind become receptive, we have to notice any time it's forming a thought. This is where your basic mindfulness practice is going to come in really useful. Because usually our mind kind of is working on autopilot, and we're not even aware of its formation of thoughts, of it being pulled this way and that by desires. We're kind of just run by our mind. We're not in control of it, it controls us. With that mindfulness practice is going to come an awareness. And so we're going to notice when my mind starts to form a thought or an idea. When my mind says it has a desire to notice that this is connected with this, is connected with that. Sometimes I strip down as much as is viable in whatever environment I'm in and crawl around, explore my environment with my senses, not with my thoughts. So when we become into our senses, we start to understand the world in a very meaningful way, but a way that words can't touch. The emotion of love. We can say that word, but what I'm saying is invoking a different feeling in everybody that hears it. Every single one of you. We can live under the illusion that that word means the same thing to you as it does to me, but it probably invokes different sensations. But when we're feeling sensations, then we're actually experiencing them, especially if we don't lay thoughts over them. So my next step out here is whether I sit down in a sit spot, or I lay down naked on the forest floor, or I crawl around and follow a toad. Whatever I do, to be aware of my mind's activity, to notice when it goes into thoughts desires, really almost any activity besides sensing and just coming fully into our senses. Our five senses, but some scientists or mystics will say we have many more. And so instead of thinking, what do I smell? What do I taste? What do I hear? What do I see? Almost just thinking of your whole organism as one sensing being. Maybe you've watched my sensory meditation. I'll try to remember to put a link to it in the description for this video. And during that meditation, we open each of our senses in turn. And we just become that sense. And in the end, we can recognize that all of our senses are essentially senses of touch. And that all the actual formation of the world happens up here. I don't even know there is anything out here, because all the actual sensing, the creation of it is happening here in the mind. So then I become this sensing being. And as I explore nature, I just soak into those sensations. When we do that, that's when we start to get this really deep level communion that goes beyond thought. That when we feel it, we can't even describe it to other people because it's trying to describe love or color or any other thing that can't be described unless we actually feel it for ourselves. Well, it can be described, but the description only forms mental thoughts in a person's head. It doesn't give them the actual experience. So that's essentially the key to a really deep level communion with nature. And this is also the key to a really deep level communion with the people around you. We can do this with our family too. When we get to that level where we are experiencing our family at a sensory level, we'll find that judgment, that anything that could possibly get us frustrated or angry or anxious, those things can't exist when I'm only in my senses. And if you want to take it even deeper, when we see our self in that way, we'll come to know ourselves in a completely different context, at a completely different level. Our whole idea of me, my idea of Kenton, is based on an ego, a self-concept that I've created. And that fiction, those walls, those labels, those stories that I've wrapped around myself, they then become the me that I know. And if I never have the opportunity in my life to experience myself at a sensory level, then I may never see that there's anything besides those labels and those creations, those stories that I've woven. When we can see ourselves without the filter of those stories and those labels, those ideas, then, well, maybe that's what most spiritual quests are about. Finding that truest self that is inside of us. And that is something that no words can describe, no one can explain to us, no one can give it to us. It's something that we can only experience when we are fully in our sensory, receptive beings. All right, my friends, I know I went really deep with that one. I did say Druidic level, right? Which, though, well, we have a real Druid among us. So it's not really about the tradition of Druidism, but it's about that archetype, that idea of a Druid, a Dunedain, as someone who can be so deeply connected with nature, a Jedi being connected with the Force, that is their basic way of moving through the world. And this is available to all of us. It's just that we have to do something that we haven't been taught how to do in our world. Once we start to learn it and let go into that receptivity, wow, it's as if we've been missing out on a vibrant, incredible world that's been there all the time. We just never could really see it because we were so busy looking at our own ideas. So this is a quest that is very worthy. It's very worthwhile. And it's beautiful in that it's the only quest that is complete before we've started it, because it's where we already are. Our sensingness, our state of being, that's our true nature. That's our true self. Then we layer all this other stuff on top of it. We forget that true self. And so it's really a coming home. I hope this wasn't too woo-woo-ish, but I think all of you will get what I'm talking about here. I would love to hear in the comments if you've experienced something like this state before, and if you try some of the things that I spoke about in this video, if you experience it a little bit, if you get into your senses. Sending you all so much love. Peace, love, and joy. We'll talk with you in the comments, my friends. I have to again say a huge thank you to everyone who's bought our book, and especially when you've left a review or written to us and shared your thoughts about it. It's really fun to have that dialogue. If you have left a comment, or rather a review, let's say on Amazon or Goodreads, usually I recognize your names. So I want to say thank you if you've done that. If you've left a pseudonym that isn't your YouTube name, I would love for you to let me know what your tag is on those other forums, because it'd be really neat to know that, so I can say thank you to you as well.